According to a new report, thousands of people who purchased guns should have never passed the federal background check system. USA Today reports the FBI issued orders to take back weapons in more than 4,000 cases.
Those buyers included people with criminal records, mental health issues, or other red flags. It's the FBI's largest retrieval request in more than a decade. David Chipman is a former ATF special agent and senior policy advisor for the Giffords Law Center and joins us now to talk a little bit about this. I didn't even know about this program at all, David, till I read it in the USA Today report. So once the FBI issues a gun retrieval request, it's up to ATF agents to actually go collect those weapons. You oversaw the retrieval program. What are the biggest risks involved when it comes to taking a gun back from someone who thinks they should own it?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show this morning. Yeah, there's nothing riskier than taking a gun from an armed person who shouldn't have had it in the first place. We have a really unique situation with our gun laws. The FBI has only provided 72 hours to either stop a gun purchase or it has to allow it to go forward. That's a really remarkable system. I don't think that we issue pilot license depending on a 72-hour system, and it's reckless that we have a system that allows guns to be transferred to people before we know it's safe. So for an agent like myself, this required us to do high-risk operations sometimes to get guns from people who should have never had them in the first place. And so for a country that seems to value our law enforcement, this is a very dangerous system that needs to be fixed.
David, do you have any idea how many of these weapons that agents are actually able to retrieve? Any numbers?
Yeah, so it's a real triage system. I think the first thing we have to understand is how small ATF is. There are only 2,500 special agents for the entire country. That's fewer agents than the D.C. Police Department has officers, and the ATF is smaller than the Broward County Sheriff's Department, which is responsible for keeping Miami safe. So one of the duties is to get guns out of the hands of people who have been determined shouldn't have passed the background check. This is a priority, but there are other priorities. Just yesterday in D.C., ATF agents were responsible for bringing down a gang of 50 people who had been killing people. So ATF has many responsibilities, but the federal government really hasn't invested for them to have a robust capability to prevent violent crime.
So, David, can I just ask you real quickly, though, with only 2,500 agents and you talk about some of the cases that they're dealing with, where does this rank on the priority list? Not that it's not a priority, but just justifiably by the numbers alone, where does it rank?
Yeah, so to be candid with you, it's a very difficult system. I know when I was in charge of this, we would do a triage. We would try to use risk assessment to identify those people that we had intelligence that might have been most violent. But let there be no mistake. I mean, the real brokenness of our background check system is the fact that across the country, criminals can buy guns outside of gun stores from private individuals with no background check whatsoever and no knowledge of ATF. So in some regards, the fact that someone's gone to a gun store at least suggests that in some cases these aren't the most dangerous people. That being said, ATF did not want to have a situation where they had knowledge that someone had got a gun that shouldn't, and they did everything possible to get these guns quickly out of the hands of people who were prohibited from having them.
So David, just so people know exactly how this happens, you identified one way in which somebody would purchase a gun even though they really shouldn't. The other way is they do go through a background check, but there's only 3 days, and if the background check doesn't come back in those 3 days, the gun owner can still sell the gun to the person who wants to buy it, right?
Yeah, so just let's be clear. The only people conducting background checks are gun stores. Mm-hmm. So these are licensed firearms dealers. This would be when you go into a store, you fill out a form, and you typically buy a new gun. Sometimes you'll buy used guns from pawn shops. So this is the scenario that we're talking about. When you go to a gun show or go on the internet to buy a gun from a private person not licensed by the government, there's no background check whatsoever. You don't fill out a form. You don't have to provide an ID. It would be similar if we had, 2 ways to buy prescription medication. You could go to the drugstore and fill out forms and sign stuff, or you could just go on the internet and buy what you want. I mean, this is a gaping problem with our gun laws in the United States. States, and it's why 95% of Americans think that you should have to go into a gun store, pass a background check, and fill out a form to keep this country safe.
So, David, on a day like Black Friday, where 200,000 people needed background checks, what percentage of those background checks just never get completed? Do you know that number?
Yeah, it all depends on the records in the system. I had the opportunity with ATF to work all across the country, and the problem is that some of our cities are very automated and their records routinely go into the system. And other places in this country, it's still like card catalogs for criminal records. And as we've seen recently, sometimes agencies, even federal agencies like in the Department of Defense, don't put all of their records into the system. So what everyone agrees is that the background check system is only as good as the records in that system, and that's why the fixed background check bill that's been bipartisan support is a good start. Make sure we've got good records in the system.
All right. David Chipman, thank you very much.